Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times. Hello, and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. We are sadly down a podcast host this week, but that's okay because I'm here with Tom and we are going to talk all about fintech with you. Tom, how has your weekend been? Week? We're not at the weekend yet, nearly.
We're dreaming of the weekend, but we're not quite there yet. But the week has been really good. It's been one of the busier weeks in terms of news. We've had like an inundation of press releases all week. It's been like crazy. We've had so much to choose from, trying to cover as much as we can. And of course, the week it gets busy, Francis and our editor Claire decide, you know what, time for a holiday. So we've been holding the fort here, just us, but it's been good. It's been a lot of news. I think we've got a couple of really cool stories to talk about today as well. And I think it's going to be a good episode. But first, Polly, how's your week been? And I know you're dreaming of the weekend, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, who knew I was so keen for the weekend? I mean, we all did. For reference, we record this podcast on a Friday, so I'm good, thank you. Like you say, just crazy week. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just this time of year or what, but it just feels like everything is just really. I guess people are trying to get stuff out just before the summer holidays, right? Because then, as soon as summer starts, no one cares about fintech anymore because it's summer. So maybe that's why it's been a bit crazy this week. But anyway, it just gives us so much more cool stuff to talk about on this podcast. So what are you going to be talking about today?
So interestingly, I say we've had a crazy busy week, but I've decided to pick some news from last week, and that's because HSBC left the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and throughout this week, I've been gaining some industry insight by talking to people from across the industry and outside the industry as well about their reactions and basically trying to decipher, what's going on with HSBC in this decision. That's my topic.
Awesome stuff. And I'm going to be talking today about a Berlin-based fintech called Recap, who was launched in the UK with a new €125 million credit facility to offer flexible debt financing to tech companies. But why don't we kick off with yours? I think that's going to be a really interesting piece. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, it's all about HSBC, and it left the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is a member-led initiative which aims to support banks to lead on climate mitigation. And basically throughout the week, I've been talking to different people in the industry to kind of work out, was this decision justified or has the bank come under fire for good reason? And it's because there's been a lot of criticism, a lot of posts on LinkedIn, people saying they're really not happy with the decision, people deciding to leave the bank because of it. I think there's been a lot of confusion about what the motivations are for HSBC to actually make this action. And I think the reason it's got quite so much traction in the media and in people's reactions is because it's the first UK bank to leave the alliance. But there have been some big names from other countries, mostly the US, that have decided to leave beforehand. So since December last year, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs have all left the alliance. And currently, Barclays, Lloyds, NatWest, and Standard Chartered are the only major UK banks that remain in this alliance. Although because of this sort of HSBC leaving, I should say, there have been concerns now that it's going to signal the start of a worrying trend for the UK and that these UK banks are going to start to look for an out as well. Now, in a statement HSBC released, it said that the Net Zero Banking Alliance played a role in developing guiding frameworks to help banks establish their initial target set and approach, but that with this foundation in place, it's going to take inspiration from its global banking peers and withdraw from the alliance with plans to continue work towards updating and implementing its net zero transition plan later this year. And it has revealed that it's going to remain engaged with the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. So it's still working with different groups for net zero and to achieve its sustainability targets, but there's a bit of question about why it's decided to leave this one, and it hasn't really cleared things up in its statement. And I thought in the article it'd be quite interesting to look at some of the motivations for other banks when they left. And one of the ones that has left already is in April, Triodos Bank, which is the ethical bank best known for its focus on sustainable banking, also ditched the Net Zero Banking Alliance after the majority of member banks voted to lower the climate ambition of the alliance and set less strict requirements. And it basically said that it wasn't comfortable with the lack of ambition and the watering down of accountability. So they basically said that they want the alliance to push for stronger and more effective measures because it doesn't want to give all these member banks too much leeway regarding sustainable aims and targets. And looking at their statement, it's very clear they were unhappy with the decision to lower the standards, and they decided that to try and maintain high standards, they decided to leave and focus on it themselves. But HSBC haven't been as clear in their statement, and their motivations look unlikely to be the same, because if this was an issue, they would have left as well in April. So there's a bit of question about why it's decided to leave now. And as a result of this news, some customers have decided to leave HSBC, and one of the most notable ones is Dale Vince, who's the founder of Ecotricity, which is the British energy company specialising in selling green energy to consumers. And he's also the chairman of the famously eco-conscious Forest Green Rovers. And he took to LinkedIn to share his frustration and basically announced that his company Ecotricity had left HSBC and taken their 600 million green economy turnover elsewhere. And he basically warned other companies. He said all companies that believe in net zero, aka the green economy, should ditch HSBC. And basically, I just thought this was such an interesting bit of news because there's been a lot of outrage about whether this is a good decision or not. And I think so many different people from the industry have differing views about this. So I wanted to get your take first of all, Polly, and see, what were you thinking about this news? First of all, what was your first reaction to it? And are you kind of in the same camp as Ecotricity, that this is just terrible news and people that believe in net zero should be ditching HSBC, or do you think it's, as some of our kind of commentary that we've resourced as says, is that perhaps we need to give HSBC time to actually see, what its actions are to try and achieve it on its own? So yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to get your take on this.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting situation, and I don't think that it's necessarily black and white in kind of what the response of this should be, in terms of what people should respond to. I think it's interesting. It's definitely made a statement, right? I think leaving the net zero initiative, that's definitely made a statement. Is that the statement that they wanted to make? I don't know, because like we're seeing, a lot of people are really disappointed. A lot of people are losing kind of some trust in HSBC. I know I saw a lot of companies on LinkedIn sort of kind of announcing that they were going to leave HSBC and take their business elsewhere because they didn't agree with the leaving the net zero ambitions. And I think it's tricky, because if it has been done for good reason, then sure, okay, fine, sounds like an idea, like you were just saying with the other bank you left earlier this year. If it's been done for like a genuine reason and they want to go out and go at it by themselves because they'll do it better and they'll be able to make more of a try at it, then great, okay, sure. But because they've kind of been so cagey about why they've done it, that kind of leads to me to believe that it is something a bit more negative, and maybe that's not accurate and that's not true, but you do have to think about the optics of the situation, not to sound too much of a marketing person. And I think it's really interesting as well, because didn't they announce earlier this year that they were pushing back its 2030 net zero emissions target anyway, and they've pushed it back to 2050? So even that kind of says to you, oh, okay, so they don't actually care too much about net zero emissions because they've just literally added 20 years onto their deadline. So is that something that they care about? It kind of doesn't sound like it, because not only have they pushed back their deadline, they've now left the net zero initiative. So you can kind of see why people are upset, and you can kind of see why people are disappointed. I think what HSB do next is going to be really crucial. They need to make it clear what their position is. I think they need to make it clear that if it is a case of they just want to go at it on their own and do it in that way, fine, cool, lovely, but you need to make that known, and you need to make that known sort of sooner rather than later, because I think they're just going to lose quite a lot more. Maybe not necessarily custom. I think certainly some people will switch banks because of this, and some businesses will switch banks because of this, but mainly I think they'll kind of lose that trust and that kind of goodwill. Like, we always talk about how banks and, finance companies, they really do operate on trust, and the trust of their consumers, the trust of their customers, and the people that use their services. And if, this ginormous bank have said, oh yeah, we'll be net zero by 2030, and then they've gone, psych, no, we won't. It's kind of, you can see why people are going to get really frustrated. So yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit of, we need to watch and wait. HSBC, I'm sure there's people running around in boardrooms right now going, right, what do we tell people? What do we announce and stuff? And I hope that they're going to do that. And they're going to do that soon. And I hope they do actual meaningful things, because so many people treat net zero emissions as just such a tick box exercise, and the climate considerations and everything like that, and we all know those things aren't a tick box exercise anymore. Like, you have to actually have a genuine plan as to how you, as a bank, a fintech, a financial company, whatever it is, but how you are going to minimize your impact on the environment and on the climate. That is what people care about right now. And for one bank to kind of brazenly go, we'll see how it goes, I think is not a good move. I think what they do next is going to be so important, and I hope they make the right move, because otherwise I think we're going to see a lot more unhappy customers.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think their next steps are going to be crucial in seeing, one, how serious they are about it, but two, how much of a reaction they do actually get from this news. Because I think if they are quite quiet in their actions regarding sustainability and net zero aims, and they don't really introduce new initiatives and are not really doing anything differently, people are going to ask, well, why have you stepped away from this group then, if not to sort of try and achieve these with a more independent approach? I think there's going to be real questions about that, and I think that the outrage might not necessarily just end once the news kind of dies down. I think there is going to be a lot of eyes now on what they do next. But part of me does wonder if, obviously we are in the fintech space, so we've seen a lot of people in the finance world talking about this and discussing it and showing outrage or not on LinkedIn. But I think, they're not necessarily the circles that the everyday consumer sees, and it's not the reaction that they're going to see. And it's certainly not something that, is covered on, the big news channels. Is not headline news for the majority of people. So I think it's interesting to see whether it is just HSBC thinking, well, we don't really want to commit too much resources or budget to this, so we're just kind of trying, take a quite back step, release a statement, and obviously has received quite a lot of traction in the finance world. But I think, I wonder if that's enough pressure to make it actually decide, okay, we really need to focus on net zero now, and put more resources into it. I'm not too sure, but I think one of the things that people were saying, sort of the recurring theme, was the importance increasingly in sort of the sustainability circle of just like complete transparency. And I think that's one thing they've kind of failed to do in their statement. They've basically said, they helped us set our initial targets, but now we're leaving, and we're going to continue focusing on our targets, but just not in the alliance. And it's a bit like, well, you haven't actually said a reason as to why you've decided to leave. You haven't really given a reason or an explanation as to actually what your future plans are, if they're going to change it all. And I think that's the first sort of point in which they could have been a bit more transparent to, get a bit more trust. And, the fact that they haven't been makes you wonder, well, are their sort of reasonings a bit underhand? So I think it's a really interesting one, and one that will, as we always say, we're going to have to wait and see what they do. But I think this is going to be a much shorter term kind of reaction, and it won't take as long to see the end result and the real motivations behind this. But yeah, I think there's a lot of news, and there's so much good insights in the article, so make sure you go and check that out, because we've got so many responses and views from different people in the industry and outside the industry, really sharing very different views and really trying to break down the different factors behind this decision. So it's definitely one to go and check out on the website. But with that, why don't we move on to your article, Polly?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tom. So kind of 10 years linked here because HSB is also involved in my article. So Berlin-based fintech Recap has launched in the UK and secured a new €125 million credit facility in order to offer flexible debt financing to tech companies, and they've been backed by HSBC Innovation Banking and Avellinia Capital. So basically, this company offers a platform for debt-based funding and capital management. And this expansion into the UK is, in theory, going to be supporting UK startups and scale-ups looking for alternatives to traditional equity financing. This really caught my eye today because I think it's always great when we see, new alternative options for funding. I think we all know that one of the big sort of issues that are facing startups in the UK, but elsewhere all around the world as well, is access to that VC funding, getting that initial funding or the ongoing funding just to actually be able to run your company, build your company, and all that sort of thing. So I've really liked the idea that, with this growing demand for funding options and for the funding demand options that are going to be a bit more alternative and not the traditional ways of funding that can be quite exclusive to a lot of different companies for a variety of reasons. I really like this was coming in and giving an alternative. So I think, startups, as it says in the article, really face a lot of tighter investor scrutiny and rising borrowing costs. But Recap's platform combines access to debt financing with tools for real-time liquidity planning and capital tracking. So it is positioned as an alternative to venture debt and conventional loans, targeting early and growth stage tech firms, hoping to help them manage capital more efficiently. So I just thought, like I said, this was a really interesting one. I always love to see alternative financing options. We always love to see something that is helpful to, the startups and the scale-ups that we have in the UK, and especially since Recap will be offering flexible credit to those UK-based companies through its €125 million facility. And has already, since launching in 2021, deployed over €100 million in Germany and the Netherlands, and with no defaults to date, which is always great. So this is the first time it's expanding outside of the EU as it moves in the UK. And I think, we always talk about how difficult the economy is right now, and especially for startups, there's really tough conditions, especially in the tech markets and the tech funding markets, and having a different alternative way for people to access that, I think, is really fantastic. So I guess I wanted to get your thoughts about this, Tom, and kind of what you think on the whole, push for alternative options when it comes to financing, but just in general, kind of financing for startups and tech startups and scale-ups, and what people come in to kind of resolve that problems. I mean, what do you think about this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's a really good initiative. And I think you kind of said already, but it's something that it's becoming increasingly difficult for startups and growth stage companies to secure VC funding because, the economy, isn't in as good of a place it was, especially, well, to be honest, globally. But, looking at the UK, say, it's something that we haven't actually seen as much VC funding since, as much as we did in 2019, 2020, that kind of period. And I think now there's a real call for alternative access to capital. And I think this is just a really good way to achieve that. And obviously, the more options that startups have to gain this capital and to get the support in building their business is always going to be good. And I think the more competition in that space, the more we're going to see VCs maybe saying, okay, well, these companies that are providing an alternative, they're actually seeing a lot of success and they're really enabling the growth of businesses. And it might maybe lead to VCs being a bit less risk averse and actually saying, okay, there aren't as many risks associated with this because, look at the way that capital has been given to these startups and, assuming there's success, which you would assume there would be a fair amount of success. And given the track record of the company in Germany, it seems like they know how to do this. This isn't their first kind of entry in something. They're just expanding the initiative to the UK. So it's hard to see that it wouldn't be at least some form of success. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, how far that support does go, and if they can grow that facility as well. That would be really good. But yeah, I think as a starting point in the UK, this is going to be really good news. And I think companies that are able to use this platform to get support, it's going to be an absolutely huge news for them. And I think it's something that, we really are calling out for. We're asking for more investment in UK businesses to bolster the economy, to bolster the fintech ecosystem. And this is exactly the type of thing I think is going to help do that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, you're right in saying that we are crying out for more support for these companies. So it's great for someone to come in and kind of go, hey, yeah, we've got that support. Here you go. And especially, I think, scaling up a company can be so difficult. Like, we know that, right? Like, you make your startup, you get some initial success, you kind of prove your concept, and then suddenly you now have to scale that business up into, an actual physical company as you keep growing and you keep getting better. And doing that can be so difficult. So having a way to help with that when it comes to, the funding and having that infrastructure in place, I think, is going to be so important and so crucial. And I think, just in general, it's nice to see some positive kind of funding news and helping startups in general, because that is the future of kind of the industry, especially when we're thinking about tech and fintech and having that on the horizon for these companies, I think is really exciting. So yeah, like you say, I think it's really great news for the companies that it's going to help. But anyway, that does bring us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much, Tom, for bringing your article and talking to me about fintech. If you want to hear any more about the articles that we've talked about today or anything else about the fintech world, head on over to fintechtimes.com, and there's plenty more news and insights over there. But very quickly, let's do what I learned this week. So each week we are learning something new all about the fintech world, because so much new information crosses our desks. Being on the editorial team at the Fintech Times, we thought it'd be fun to share that with our listeners. So Tom, what have you learned this week?
Well, this week, one of the things that caught my eye was new research from GoHenry. And it's that 84% of kids and teens revealed that they want to see more financial education taught in schools, with 91% of kids and teens saying that it's a key skill that they think is going to help them in their adult life. And that's all from the GoHenry news report, the Kids' Eye view of the national curriculum.
Awesome. Thank you. And then what I learned this week is that according to the World Bank, the number of adults without access to financial services has dropped from 2.5 billion in 2011 to 1.4 billion in 2021. So things are going in the right direction, which is always really nice. But anyway, Tom, thank you so much for joining me this week. Hopefully Francis will be back next week and we'll have the whole gang together again. But until then, thank you so much again, and I will catch you on the next one.
And I will see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using #TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.